Vladimir Putin lashing out at the West for supporting Ukraine as he rallies Russia during an annual parade marking the end of World War II.
It comes as Elon Musk reveals he was threatened by Russia's space agency chief, easy for me to say, responding on Twitter, quote, "If I die under mysterious circumstances, it's been nice knowing you."
Yeah, because heroically he was allowing the Ukrainians to communicate with each other by using his internet service.
Darling.
Fox News contributor Newt Gingrich is author of the upcoming book, Defeating Big Government Socialism. He joins us now. Newt, first off, it was not the "I'm going to blow up everybody with my nuclear weapons." He didn't say "I'm going to have a national movement, conscription day, and go out and win this war." He just had his same rhetoric, it seems, of they're Nazis, and now he said they had a nuclear weapon and we had to invade. Are you surprised?
Well, I'm a little surprised, but I think that Putin is really in a difficult position. They made a mistake. They thought Ukraine would be easy. It's turned out to be very hard. At the same time, does he want to escalate to a point where he's involved in a war that he can't possibly win? And that would be a war with the entire West. So he can't figure out at this stage how to get out of it. The Ukrainians, I think, are gradually getting stronger, not weaker. And the Russians, on the other hand, are getting weaker, not stronger. But I think from a Western perspective, it's helpful to remember May 8th really matters in Russia. The war between Germany and the Soviet Union was a war of annihilation. And, you know, they lost 30 million people. Right. So from their standpoint, that's why the word Nazi has such huge power in Russian culture, because they literally saw the face of total annihilation and defeated it. And that included Ukraine, which lost millions to the Nazis. Right. So there's a whole background historically to what we're watching right now. But in the end, they're not going to win. The technology of the West, the courage of the Ukrainians, and the degree to which a corrupt dictatorship ultimately undermines its own systems. So you're not going to get any initiative out of the Russian army because they've all been taught basically to hide and hope the dictator doesn't notice you.
Well, Zelensky linked the current fight against Russia to World War II as well and said very soon there will be 2 victory days in Ukraine. We won then and we will win now. Do you think that Putin will use this occasion to further intensify the war in Ukraine?
I thought he would, but he hasn't done any of the things that would be sort of the next big stage. He hasn't announced a nationwide draft. Yep. He hasn't increased the kind of weapons they're using. And the truth is, he's strategically suffering a disaster. I think both Finland and Sweden are now going to join NATO. That would never have happened if he had not invaded Ukraine. And I think it's very likely that the longer this war goes on, the more the Russians are going to lose in casualties, and the more Ukrainians are going to recapture their own country. So he's right now playing a losing hand, and I think doesn't know how to get out of it.
Yeah, Newt, a moment ago you mentioned technology, and there's been this back and forth that we cited in the beginning about what the Russian space agency head was going back and forth with Elon Musk, because Elon Musk is providing satellite online ability for the people of Ukraine. And Elon Musk says, you know, if I disappear mysteriously, I had a good run or something like that. But just the fact that, you know, it's kind of a rivalry thing. It's like SpaceX versus the Russian space agency. Who's doing a better job these days?
Well, there's no question that Elon Musk is probably the greatest inventive entrepreneur of our lifetime. Now, whether it's Tesla or it's batteries or you name it. The very fact that a private company could shape an entire battlefield by technologically using space, and this should be a reminder to all Americans, the Space Force matters. What President Trump created and Vice President Pence led at the Space Council, this stuff really matters. And of course, the Russians had no calculation. Nobody in the world would have had a calculation to say, gee, what if somebody brought in an entire space-based internet? And that's part of why the Ukrainians have been able to use these drones, because they're able to control them through SpaceX's capabilities. I would also say this, and the Russians need to be told this by the Biden administration. The deliberate killing of an American is an act of war. So all of these various threats about Elon Musk are nonsense. And we should be prepared as a country to protect our citizens, period. And we should communicate to the Russians that this is not something we would tolerate. They have a long history of poisoning people, including in Great Britain. Several people have been killed by the Russians. We should indicate quite clearly. We protect Americans, and if the Russians were to actually go after Musk, we would have to see that as a very deliberate act of war against the United States.
Be crazy if they went after the world's richest man. Newt, thank you very much for joining us from D.C.